the framing is like from what job can this student do right now to like how do we prepare students for both an immediate contribution and lifelong adaptability.
If a student is welding at 17, why do we assume that student will not become an engineer later?
I was like, okay, well then what is a no dead end version so it's like crystal clear in my mind? So that same student would build structures, learn blueprint reading, uses CAD software, earns OSHA certification, takes applied geometry physics, completes internships with contractors, earns dual credit with a technical college.
Chris said, we're accountable to the perception of achievement. And that's a damning statement right there.
You're listening to the Disrupt Education podcast, powered by U Science. Here are your hosts, Peter Hostrauser and Alli Dahl.
Yeehaw! Welcome to the Disrupt Education podcast. Yes, I yeehawed to start this thing off because that's where we're at, Alli. How are you?
That's where we're at. Literally right before you hit record, you were just like, okay, let's do this. Yeehaw! And I was just like, wow, that's a new one. So
I gotta put my Jason Van Nuss cowboy hat on, man. Like that's what I need.
Definitely need yeah, I mean, like I think that's a good vibe for last week's episode with Chris Nesmith. Like, you know, if you aren't feeling a little, I don't know, cowboy, cowgirl in your soul, like let's go do some barrel racing on horses or something. Like, I don't know. I feel energized from that conversation in a way that maybe like going to a rodeo might feel, like bull riding or something. There's a lot in that episode. So yeah.
Right. Oh man, that's what I love about just our opens. We just kind of throw it out there and go. So yeah, if you didn't hear last week's episode, you must go back and hear it. Yeah, Chris Nesmith. I think he just explained why wheels are spinning in education and we're not going anywhere. And it's not because the educators don't care. It's not because of, the students are failing, but actually he kind of taught us the history of the entire system and being intentionally designed to separate opportunity. So I thought that was, yeah, open up. Where do you want to start with this one?
I mean, I want to start with the fact that, so we podcast a lot. We have lots of conversations, hundreds of conversations at this point. And certain guests, like they bring out different vibes and feelings and whatnot. And I was saying this, but right before we recorded, because people, I always appreciate a little behind the scenes. Because I was like, I haven't left a conversation with a guest with so many questions. And that could be because like he's a superintendent, people. Like he gave us an hour. That's a long time for a superintendent.
Especially this time of year. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Like end of the school year season is crazy. I mean, like I don't actually know an off season for a superintendent. I feel like that's pretty on job.
It just ramps up at the end of the year, right?
So I think maybe part of it is like, sometimes after we record, we'll ask like some other follow-up questions that we might then include like on the next week's episode. We didn't get any of that. So it was like this, like, okay, time's up. Like that's all we get. But also like in thinking about everything that he shared, like you have to listen to that episode on like 0.5 when he's talking.
Yeah.
So it's very dense, and that's good because he's like compacting a lot of knowledge in a short time frame, which I always appreciate as an academic type or an intellectual. And yeah, like, but I was like, as I was preparing to record this week's episode, I was like, I need to know some stuff that or review, get myself like kind of prepped in a different way. So that's exciting. Because this will come out in the summer, and we've talked about this before with Robert Peppo, is like there's an on and an off season. And like the summer can be quote unquote an educator's off season, like unplug, rewind, reset. But it can also be like a deep dive into like how you want to do things differently or, forecast, change, set up new models, ideas, partnerships. And so that I think the timing of this one when it's going to come out is going to be perfect for those who are in that off season but wanting to do something differently. You can get a lot of inspiration from his episode.
Yeah, that's funny. I just spoke with a one of our fellow CTE educators today. So if you don't know education, which most of you probably can figure it out, at the end of the year, like you get your schedules for the next year, and a lot of times, and we're talking secondary here, and even in basically 6 through 12, or you get your assignment in elementary school for what grade you're going to be teaching the next year. Um, we were talking with a fellow CTE teacher, and he's moving into the marketing area, and it's interesting because I think the downtime in education for educators who are pushing the boundaries and doing some different things is minimal, to say the least. Because I was talking to him, and he's taken over some of the marketing courses. I went back to our episode with why can I can never remember what's her name? Jen, right? Jen
Jen
Smith?
Sharp.
Jen
Jen
Sharp.
Sharp.
Sorry. There's a block there because that
It's okay.
episode is so awesome, of just being lazy and understanding how to bring other people in and work with people and let people do it, right? Like she mentioned on that podcast. And what do you remember what episode that was? I feel like it was like 300 or something. We'll put it
It's
up here.
it's a little after.
Okay. So, but one of the things that we were talking about was, hey, look, like he is not a huge marketing guy, but he's a great educator. So there's a difference there, right? So some people really go deep into their field and understand, and some people just kind of, go light, but they're great educators, so they figure it out with their students. And he's one of those, right? He
Mm.
doesn't have a lot of social media and things like that, but he'll be teaching marketing. So I was like, that's excellent. Number one, because you don't have a lot of, like, I don't know, thoughts going into this where you're going to maybe skew or bias some of the students. And he looked at me, he was like, oh yeah, you're right. But then I was like, and I've got a ton of people who need internships in the marketing areas. And it's just one of the biggest things. So I was like, I'll help you put them into the classroom. We just do projects, right? And let's go. And so I think those moments, like Chris has talked about from last week, is where this are you good at school versus good at work, or all these different areas where we start accidentally labeling kids and different things like that. Well, we do it with educators as well. So that's why I was like, you don't need to know all this information. You just need to
Mm.
try things and you will see what comes up. It's just that Chris last week basically laid out the entire false binary of what it is. And that goes so deep. I mean, there's so many levels to it. And I think that was super interesting. I am right now going to go down to my local library and try to find how many books I can read about Booker T. Washington, his education, the way that he built it 100 years ago, because that he was referencing that a lot
Mm.
last week.
He was referencing that a lot. That was one of the questions I had because it was like I need to brush up on like my history a little bit.
Hmm.
Because I was like, well, this is a really interesting, it's kind of like a term that, or a person that maybe you heard of, you know, at some point, and then it just like gets buried with all, and then you start hearing like a term or a name or an idea, and you're like, I need to refresh on that. And so that was kind of like I was interested in that, and like, the idea of land grant universities and what
Yep.
how that like kind of impacted our history, how CTE emerged kind of out of that. And so
Hmm.
one of the things that I was reading up on, and again, I'm not a historical buff, but I was like, okay, there, and Jeremy Smith had talked somewhat about this, but he used other examples. But I didn't realize, with the expansion of the West and in at post Civil War, around the Civil War time, you had this huge development and need for railroads, agriculture, and so there was this need and desire for people to like learn skills and also develop communities.
Hmm.
And universities before then were basically this elitist, the Ivy League, traditional philosophy, the arts, stuff like that, but they needed people to do like agriculture, engineering, um, mechanical type roles. And so then enter in land grant universities, which have whole other historical side of with like what the actual land use was, which I'm like, wow, this is a dip into history that I wasn't aware of, that I felt like he knows a lot more about all of that was like compacted into his answers. And I was like, we probably need to unpack that a little bit on the podcast because I know I'm not the only one
Yeah.
who doesn't know the history there.
Hmm.
Um, and it's interesting to frame it in 2026 because of the impacts and kind of it's almost like he was saying this isn't a new model. This was a model of like economic development back in the 1860s. And it was literally designed to build communities. Like they needed more people to build and grow things. And so like enter in, they were like, we need a development for the local economies. And now it's like land grant universities went through a time where they just you can't really differentiate them from like today's universities. They're federally funded in different ways, but what's interesting is that I think that that's why it's being brought up again is like the mission of those universities and post-secondary and now in high school. It's like what is the purpose of school in terms of the local economy? What are we building? What are we growing locally? So I thought that was really interesting to bring that frame in because I wasn't aware that that's how they originally set up. And that model kind of got, I don't know, like shifted. And
Hmm.
now it's being brought back uh,
Right.
in today's world. Very interesting ideas out of that.
Yeah. Um, yeah, it takes some deep thinking. And I know I mean, definitely what I love about that conversation was it does spark your curiosity. We all know, we've all seen the picture, right, of the 1910 classroom and the 2010 classroom or 2026 classroom, right? A traditional classroom. Rows, desks, everything looks the same. But what a lot of people don't talk about is what Chris was talking about. Actually, the culture in education in traditional systems has not changed either.
Mm.
So you labeled students, like you said, an academic or a tradesperson, or a college or career, and these types of things, and that has still come full circle still today.
Yeah.
Because I know in a lot of our conversations, when we talk about CTE, a lot of people go directly to the trades. Ah, it's the trades, man. Yeah, you got to be a plumber, you got to be, and that is actually an intentionally designed system 100 years ago that is
Yep.
still making its way here. And that's what the other thing I don't think a lot of people understand is, yes, visually, it's very easy to see a classroom, but you're actually doing the same thing that we did, like I said, in the 20s, the 30s, the 40s, where, oh, like, yeah, that kid's not an honors kid, so we're gonna probably put a tool in their hand and blah, blah, blah. But what I liked about, how Chris, and again, I want to keep saying it too. This is not a new idea. And we were trying to give him, props for it, but he was like, this isn't my idea, guys. This is like 100 years old. But if a student is welding at 17, why do we assume that student will not become an engineer later?
Mhm.
Because if you think about it, in a lot of our internships, right, we have an internship with a franchise where they go in, it's a restaurant. So our students work 15 hours in that restaurant. And then they take, it's a 60-hour program. And then the 45 hours, they take some of things of what they've learned. So if you think of a welder, you think of somebody in business, they see how the business works. And then now you're over here in corporate, so you have a better idea of the product, service, or whatever. Why do we assume that if you start on the floor of a fast food restaurant, you're not ever going to run a fast food restaurant? Or if you start as a volunteer at a hospital, you're not going to be the lead neurosurgeon in a hospital because that's what we're doing right now. And that's why I love just like seeing this from his standpoint. But again, that this wasn't the only thing, Allie. Like he went to Germany and Switzerland. That
I
was some
know
awesome stuff.
that but yes, that whole conversation around the German and Swiss models was super interesting. Before I dive into that, because I
Yeah.
like you were talking about, yeah, there's literally so much
I'm
in this
going fast
episode.
like Chris did, so but we have time. I'm not a superintendent. Thank you,
Okay, so
Jesus.
what one of the things that I've always felt is like a strength of mine, it's been confirmed by like my youth science aptitudes and
hmm
whatnot, is being able to kind of pull uh like a term apart that seems really simple but actually has like a depth to it that, and it was like in chemistry when I was teaching, was a skill set because it's a highly technical subject matter, and students, what would be really obvious for me as an expert teaching it would not be obvious for a student. And one of the terms that Chris used that I've heard now lots when we podcast is this idea of like dead ends. And he made a statement on the podcast is that he wasn't going to have any dead ends in his CTE pathway programs. And I was like, people keep using this term and I need like some concrete examples. And I can't, like, again, I think some of our listeners would appreciate that. So I was like trying to think about what does it mean to be a dead end, what you were kind of talking about there, like a welder, and we can't envision them going anywhere else or like working in a hospital and as a volunteer and whatnot. So he used construction carpentry, and I was like, okay, well, what is a dead end version? And so what I was kind of like trying to break out for this episode was, okay, a dead end version is a student learns basic framing, tool use, and they do repetitive like construction tasks.
hmm hmm
But there's no math integration, no CAD design exposure, no business skills, no college credit, no pathway beyond entry level labor. I was like, oh, okay, that makes more sense. It's like sometimes we say like what we want, but we don't necessarily say what it isn't. And so then I was like, okay, well, then what is a no dead end version? So it's like crystal clear in my mind. So that same student would build structures, learn blueprint reading, uses CAD software, earns OSHA certification, takes applied geometry physics, completes internships with contractors, earns dual credit with a technical college. Now, I was like, wow, okay, that makes it so much more crystal clear for me because I'm not from the CTE world,
hmm
right? And not all of our listeners are. And so now that student could be a carpenter, construction manager, architect, civil engineer, project estimator, business owner, skills trade entrepreneur, and that hands-on experience becomes a foundation, not a ceiling. And I was like, oh, that helps me so much understand what it means to not be a dead end. Because, like, okay, you're building internships, you're in this business space, but for those of us who aren't, like, what does it actually like mean? And I mean, I'll give mad props to Christy Valesky, Jeff Frost with
I
this
was
book,
just gonna
CT
say that.
Reimagine.
Yeah.
This brings to life and gives you the blueprint for sure. But
hmm
there's still like, again, if you're not in the CT world, then like, or if you were trying to build this on your own listening and you're like, I don't want dead ends. So then like, well, what is a dead end, right? What
Mhm.
what is what like put in what your program is right now and be like, is it a dead end? Like, and how could I adjust it? So there were some other cool examples that I kind of worked through with like automotive technology.
Hmm.
So students who are just like changing oil, replacing parts, following repair procedures. But a no dead end version would be like electrical systems, diagnostics, EV technology, data systems, customer communication, entrepreneurship, engineering concepts. They could earn ASE certification, internship hours, college credit. And
Yep.
then they could be a master technician, EV systems specialist, mechanical engineer, fleet manager, automotive software technician, or owner.
Yep.
And I was like, okay, now I'm starting to understand. And the last one I kind of wanted to highlight was because this one has been brought up on the podcast before with CNA. And a lot of people are like, they don't like the CNA path for as a pathway. And I didn't really understand why. Because again, I've never done that pathway. So the dead end version is just CNA work, but a no dead end version, students would get patient care experience, anatomy knowledge, healthcare ethics, communication skills, clinical observation opportunities. So then they could later pursue nursing, physical therapy, med school, healthcare admin, sports medicine, biomedical engineering, public health. And I was just like, so basically, it's just taking like a a single immediate task, like or an isolated technical skill, and assuming it's suitable for like lifelong
Hmm.
careers.
Right.
So a no dead end program then is working on durable transferable skills, integrating academics with real world application, obviously the connection to industry, post like higher ed, some capacity. I go
Mhm.
back to Jeremy Smith with like, think of the end in mind and build backwards. Um, and so anyway, it's just like it's I think the framing is like from what job can this student do right now to like how do we prepare students for both an immediate contribution and lifelong adaptability.
Hmm.
I like so that one phrase dead
Yep.
end.
Hmm.
I like you we could do so like such a deep dive on just that,
Yeah. Yeah.
and that's where I like when I started this episode, I was like, I had a lot more questions because he's using these terms fluently. So,
Right.
like Sandra Adams, fluency work, like if you're in this work of education, don't always assume that people know the term at the level that you do. Like a good educator, good teacher is gonna like show examples and whatnot. And sometimes on the podcast, like when I re-listen, I'm like, oh, I should have included that concrete example.
That's why we
But
do a
I wanted to.
recap.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, you're spot on, and I've got so many different stories around that. But I've heard like obviously Jeremy Smith, the 0 to 1, right?
Yeah.
If it's a dead end, it's a zero. Like here's a skill. Okay, good job. You passed the test, right? We've heard Christy Valesky say it, right? Like if we're training somebody to become, yeah, okay, we'll go to the trade since everybody's CTE trades, a plumber, right? Why are we not training that person to be a business owner while they're doing it, right? And she said it on many of our podcasts. I think that's the whole platform of U Science is here is your aptitude, here's your interest. You add the skill in from the school because you're getting this coursework. Where now schools, we've heard a lot of schools are designing coursework around the aptitudes. And then what? And then, and that's I like that term because that's the dead end or an and then. So once you get this, and then what? And then
Mhm.
what? And you constantly ask that. Now young students, I mean high school students don't always like that because it makes them think. And and the recording of this, it was the absolute last day of our seniors. And then what? Right? They love it, but they also hate it because no one's asking them and then, because next year we're like, okay, well, we signed up for I know exactly, if I'm a student in the system, the K through 12 system, I know exactly 99% of what my schedule is next year. I may change some things. So it has been decided, right? But I think what we're trying to do here is kind of what's next? What is something else that you can do with this, and keep going? There's such a finality. I feel like the traditional system was built to be a dead end. The dead end is the diploma and get into college for basically through the 90s, right? And now. And that's the dead end. But there's
Mm.
no fluency, like, Sandra Adams is saying. It's not a fluent move. And I think that's what's so interesting about it. And that's why I wanted, like, you're exactly right. We've heard a lot of people talk about, basically high school is a little too late. We brought that up a little bit. Um, I did want to bring up the Germany Switzerland thing, not just because of my awesome last name that is totally Americanized, but I do want to, like, I did not know, because I've always made the assumption of Europe has always split them off, right? When you're like 12 to 14 years old and you're like, you're going down this pathway and you're going, and that's not the truth anymore. And I think that's interesting again when we start talking about, applying the experience before theory or before building something. It takes me back, you know, and I know, like, because I worked for contractors as an electrician's assistant, right? So basically I had an apprenticeship in my summers. It wasn't official, but I would like run line and everything. We would build houses, we'd be working in steel mills, etc. Right? But especially the housing, right? When you would have somebody in there, the contractor, you had the architect, da da da, you had all the plans, but nobody really understood each other. And it's such burned into my head. We're in this multi-million dollar house we're building on beautiful Lake Maxinkuckee in Culver, Indiana. It's awesome. And, you know, they're putting in kitchen, and we have already threw all the electric in the wall, right? And then they drywalled over it. I specifically remember like the hundreds of thousands of dollars of stuff they were putting. They had a hood that was beautiful copper hood from Brazil. It was amazing. It was crazy. I'm from a small town, so I'm like, what the heck? Um,
Hmm.
and I remember the electrician who basically was my supervisor was like, well, there's supposed to be a recep or an outlet box here, and there's not. Just took the hammer and just started looking for it. Bam, 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 breaking into it. And I get it. I guess that's the way people do things because they're like, oh, the drywall screwed up or whatever. But imagine if, like, you know, you basically, you know, if everybody built things and did different things, then you would start to understand. And again, it kind of goes back into this is exactly why I think internships matter, where that experience changes understanding. And yeah, you have the pinnacle, like maybe you want to be the owner of an electrical company or something like that. But if you don't understand where the receps are or how to communicate that to somebody else who's on the team, I think it just goes it's separated, and then you get these hammers. And I feel like that's what it is with
Mm.
CTE and your traditional, math, science, English, history in a lot of instances. But it sounded like Chris was doing some very interesting things there as well, where you start seeing building and math and different things like that, where, I brought up the money thing. You put a dollar sign around numbers in algebra, students really pick up on it really quickly who are struggling with it. So,
Very quickly.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I feel like, we're still obsessed with sorting students like in different ways and how I know we talk about how it unintentionally shut doors, but honestly, I think somewhat it intentionally shuts doors. I don't know. This episode of the Disrupt Education podcast is brought to you by UScience BrightPath, the next generation platform helping students make personalized decisions as they move from education to career.
If we truly want students prepared for life after high school, we can't rely on outdated, interest-only guidance to navigate a dynamic career future. UScience starts with aptitude discovery, helping students build a deeper understanding of who they are and how they're wired to succeed. From there, students create plans, develop in-demand skills, validate them through industry-recognized certifications, and connect directly with employers.
The result? Intentional pathways with real opportunity.
UScience is the only platform bringing all of this together at scale, which is why we at Disrupt Education Podcast are proud to partner with them.
Learn more at uscience.com/disrupteducation-podcast. Request a demo and let them know you heard about UScience right here.
I think the systems, German and Swiss and other countries, they prioritize different things. So it was interesting to hear that German engineers are like the best in the world. And their pathway is they basically do carpentry and they're like building the buildings they're going to design later as structural engineers. And I'm like, man, that makes so much more sense because one, you're working with all those people before you're then learning how to design it. So you would understand a lot. And he did bring this up, this idea of like teamwork. And when there's competing interests with the electricians, the plumbers, the drywallers, the painters, the install, like concrete pour, like all of the different aspects that go into construction, they all have different motivations and deadlines and timing and everything. And so, but if you understand all of that, have worked through it, then if you're later designing it, you'd have a better idea of the whole process from beginning to end versus just this like theoretical liberal arts education that the American education system does prolifically.
Right.
And so when I was kind of looking at this, I was thinking about like, okay, well, like what does each system emphasize? And it seems like in Germany and Switzerland, they tend to ask like, how do we prepare students for a clear role in society and the economy? And then once you then go work through that clear role. So there's less ambiguity when you're leaving school, what you're going to be doing. But in the US system tends to ask, how do we maximize flexibility and individual choice? Those are very different questions and they have very different outcomes. And so I was kind of looking at like what would be like a high level comparison to like the priorities of these systems. And so like workforce alignment and standardization and clear career path clarity are really, they're higher for Germany and Switzerland. But for the US, local flexibility and then student choice flexibility is much higher. So it's not like there's pros and cons to any system. And that's one of the things that I get the sense and pushback from parents and students potentially with, right, the disruptive topic is tracking kids or people think that if students are interested in something in elementary or middle school and they get tracked or they get placed, that they will then end up in a dead end. And what if they change their mind? So there's a lot of fear around that I don't think needs to be, right? So that like, I really do think the phrase dead end and understanding that if a student goes down this pathway, that it's just going to open more doors than closing them off and making that pathway, like you want it to be broad enough, right? This question of how do we prepare students for both immediate contribution and lifelong adaptability? Yeah. That I think is the crux of like, it could be a really big shift in disrupting education is like, this pathway is not a dead end. It's giving you skills. It's giving you understanding of things that you can use anywhere,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
Chris talked about how 22 of the 24 durable skills are best learned on the job. So it doesn't matter what job, if those are like universal skills, you just need to be on a job, you need to be on a pathway. But then the education system just needs to make sure that it's not a quote unquote dead end. Like
Hmm.
it's not just these single, very specific technical skills that aren't transferable, that they're getting the teamwork, they're getting the communication, they're getting problem solving, they're getting whatever it is. And yeah, I think that's the opportunity for education in terms of looking at the German and Swiss models and like how they are different. They
Hmm.
have different outcomes, different priorities, but I like that there are people like Chris in the US. They're like, I want to tap more into that because I see the strengths here that our system isn't maximizing.
The strengths of our system are basically for 15 to 20% of the population. I mean, let's
Mhm.
be honest. I mean, there's the data, statistics, all that stuff. The couple of things that I would love to see, and maybe some of our listeners can know this, or it would be really weird if they did, but like, what are the post-secondary outcomes of um, students who go through a German or Swiss system, right? Are they dropping out? Are they switching majors? Are they like what does that look like? Because here I think choice and ambiguity for students who are and coming out without clarity only helps the wealthy. I mean, it does because you can absorb cost of change in college, right? You can go to, a big university, drop 100 grand, and then change your major, and you're like, you just added another year. Now that's becoming less and less evident because the cost of college is rising and rising and rising and rising. But I think that's the challenge. And to your point about you know, dead end or pigeonholing um, students. It still is such something that needs to be learned with educators. And because I've heard so many educators, and when I say educators, I mean teachers, counselors, administrators, even parents, like if a kid or a young person is going down a pathway and then they have to take certain amount of classes to get to what we call the college and career pathway endorsement. So it's a diploma endorsement. I have heard so many of them say, we're pigeonholing them, we're putting them into a hallway with no doors. And here's the reason why I think that happens. I think that happens because a very high percentage of people in education have only been in education and it was crystal clear what their straight line is, right? Think about it. We even talked to counselors who said this on our work-based learning U Science one, where the counselors usually go in, or even educators, I'll say teacher, we even, put this out to across the education world. They graduate high school, they go to a college, they get their 4 year, some of them go get a master's, and then they go right back into a middle school or high school. They have not seen, and again, I don't know, that's their experience and that's okay, but that's only such a small amount of the entire workforce.
Yeah.
And yeah, it gets frustrating because, even when you hear that as an educator who you have seen students, for 20 some years go through your coursework and your department and just really knock it out of the park and have clarity and reduce their spending and switching at the next level because of this. And like you said, you're putting them in a hallway, but it's not a dead end. It's got so many different doors that you can go through. Aptitudes, like we'll talk of that. I mean, There's platforms where, even you science is talking about the AI and how it can actually start giving you what this looks like for you or where you could go. But I can't tell you, Allie, how many students I have that are high scholar students, very, very good academic students at their junior year when we start to vet them for their internship program, and they have no resume. They don't understand networking at all, and they really don't have awareness on what they're really good at. And they may say I'm bad at math or I'm good at, but that's based on a grade of regurgitation. And I just think this applied learning, it creates so much confidence and clarity. And they see purpose in it, right? Um, I can just see this in your chemistry class. What was it? Sapphire? Was he working in a sapphire mine? And I was like, "Oh, Allie, you got to talk about sapphires here."
I know. I was like when he was talking about the hardness scale, which is, the difference. He was talking about the difference between silicon and sapphire, and using sapphire as a conductor for different. I don't remember his specific application, but it conducts similarly as a semiconductor, just like silicon does.
Yeah.
But silicon, well, he didn't say this, but is very brittle. If you ever
Mhm.
like worked with it or um identified it or whatnot, it creates a lot of dust very easily. So it's useful for some things in industry, and it's in our phones and computer chips and different technology. But to use sapphire, which is it's much harder, and it can't be scratched, doesn't create like the same kind of dust, or it's much harder to. Meaning you need something on the Mohs hardness scale in order to break something. You need something that is at a harder scale, and sapphire is like the second or third naturally occurring. Like diamonds are the hardest,
Hmm.
and then sapphires are right below it. There's like man-made stuff that can scratch those types of things.
Hmm.
But if you're talking about its use, I was like, oh, that's a really interesting application of chemistry that I would totally use in the classroom. Like those are the types of things that are interesting to students, but it basically makes chemistry like not a dead end.
Right.
Chemistry is so easy to take, and I've said this before, it's like my teaching philosophy is that I used chemistry. It was the vehicle in which I helped students better understand the world around them.
Yeah.
And so any time I was teaching it, I always tried to anchor it in something outside of the classroom within the means. Now, again, this was before I was podcasting, and I see chemistry even in so many other ways now when I sub or tutor students beyond even like the examples that I used when I was teaching. But you can still use what we're talking about in any class, right? Like
Yeah. Yeah.
this mindset, this idea that like, okay, I have this curriculum, and I have to teach these standards. The how you do that is the gift that you have as the educator. It really is. And so, especially with AI and everything, is that the shift should be from less like individual contribution
Hmm.
to how do students work in teams? How do they work through, distributed responsibilities, or um, just like group conflict, or managing things. Like he did talk about that this idea of AI developing to agents and
Hmm.
agentic AI almost calls for more human group work
Yep.
and teamwork skills in order to better understand how to get AI to do that. Because it's like it is a new chicken and the egg. Like if you don't understand it, then how could you teach a computer system to do it? If
Yeah.
it's kind of like the structural engineer that just gets a liberal arts degree, doesn't have any actual, has never built anything,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
is trying to tell the builders and the electricians and the plumbers and all these other people how to do their job, and they've never worked with them. It was
Hmm.
completely backwards,
Yeah.
right? Like no wonder the Germans are the best engineers in the world, because they understand the people that they're working with and the problems, the daily problems that they encounter. And the same thing would be true if you were managing people or managing AI.
Hmm.
I'm sure there's competing competing priorities. So I
Right.
now is the time to think outside the box and how you teach the standards and how you bring the world into the classroom.
Hmm.
And if you're an educator.
I think along with that, as an educator, one of the things I hear a lot in grumblings, and again, being in several different districts and different things like that, is the administrator who has never been in the classroom. You've heard educators, if you're a teacher, the administrator that you might have come across in your entire career that has minimal time, if any, in the classroom, and you're complaining about it. That's what we're saying here.
Yeah.
That's what we're saying because when you talked about chemistry there and you were talking about like, the diamonds and the sapphires and they make this to cut and different things like that. Imagine if you were in that classroom, right? And you had to teach something around that. I don't know,
You do.
the hardness scale.
You have to teach metals versus non-metals versus
There we
semi-metals. Like
go.
you do. You have to
Right?
teach it.
And you had every student's aptitude in there, and you knew who they could team up with.
I know.
And then you could bring it to their interest and aptitude, right? Because here's what happened in my chemistry class. And if people don't know, it's very funny because chemistry teacher right here next to me was my worst subject in high school. I hated it because it was here are the elements, memorize them all and then spit them back to me. And we did a couple experiments. I don't really remember any of them, but it was just like, okay, we're going to light this or do this and then pour acid or whatever on it. I'm sorry, I'm blowing up your entire
Okay.
curriculum here. Well, actually,
Fine.
I'm not. It was the educator. But and it had nothing to do with anything. There was no attachment to anything. It's just like the rogue practice of a math class or you need to read Shakespeare. Why? Now, I know TJ Very, I'm sorry, you love Shakespeare, but I hate it. Actually, I probably love it more than I think because it attaches to something. And if it did, yeah, there's a few, I'm sure we can get some cross references. But the way it's presented is the way that AI can just spit it right back to you. You have to have these places where, again, you can have all this technology in AI and it will actually, okay, fill in the table of the elements for me. Here you go. I just did that in one click of a button. Now I want you to, I don't know, you're building a microphone, right? Like I'm a podcaster. You're going to build a microphone and you're going to use different metals to do this and you have to experience something. So you have to create meaning with it, right? And I think that's where everything is going to get flipped on its head. And I think that look, there's nothing wrong with traditional coursework. There isn't. As a matter of fact, I think it's super important, like math, science, history, English. Or your language, reading, definitely. But I think this might be the first time in our entire history where AI is going to change that and, like you just said, make it more humanistic. So we're going to have to look at individual performance rather than rogue A, B, C, D. You know, um, it teamwork is going to become the most valuable thing at the end of the day,
Yep.
because everybody works in teams, right? You have to in order to do this. So that was interesting. And then, you know, we start following the money and start to realize why education doesn't change. That was interesting about the funding.
Hey, I mean, I'll take his challenge. He said he doesn't believe that he's hireable as a superintendent.
Yeah.
And I feel like there are districts out there that would be like, okay, I'll take your bet and raise you, and they want a risk taker.
Hmm.
Not all, like I will say a lot of what we're talking about, and as you were talking throughout the whole podcast, a lot that is under the surface of this whole conversation is fear.
Yes.
And it's really a lot of the decisions made in education are fear-based. And Chris talked about that in terms of being a superintendent and the just the funding cycle and what the goals are. Sorry, we asked at the end of the podcast, what's like a bold what's bold leadership in education? And it's basically like doing what's best for students. And what's doing for best for students is not doing the optics of what's best for students. It's like actually doing what's best for students, and that comes at a risk.
Hmm.
And a lot of people won't take that risk because of the fear. And I think that's probably one of the reasons why skydiving for me is like such an important exercise for those who like go on the journey, because you will once you get over the fear, you jump out of the plane, you realize all of your fears were like in your head. And that's like the heart of what a lot of what Chris is talking about is, and all of the decisions that we're talking about in terms of education, whether we do them or not, is whether we let fear win
Hmm.
or we jump out of the aircraft and
Hmm.
let's see how the fear really feels after we've done that. And that's just such an opportunity for education right now is take the risk. And I think there just are more risk takers right
Yeah.
now.
Yeah.
That's the shift I feel in
Hmm.
education, where, and that's what's exciting about disrupting education is that as more and more people get bold, as more and more people are willing to take the risk, jump out of the plane, then people like Chris will be more enticing as a hire
Hmm.
because they're going to actually do what's best for students and not just sit on the status quo and do the compliance checking or get the money for the money's sake, but not it's getting that funding comes with XYZ stipulations that may not be what's best for kids. And
Hmm.
so I would share this episode with anyone who needs that push to
Hmm.
to take the risk, because this is the time in education to do it. And I just think, if we leaned into the local community and like maybe the funding model has to shift, that's a big disruptive statement. And like you might have to let go of some quote unquote standard funding in order to get funding elsewhere that allows you to really make the changes in education that you want.
Hmm. Hmm.
And that's scary for people because, right, the money is the money. There,
It's
there
yeah.
probably is funding out there. It's
Well,
possible.
yeah, and there's a couple things here. You're spot on, and that's why I love the analogies of jumping out of a plane. It works so well with it because it is fear. Everything is fear, and we're so scared. We've stayed the same in many ways, not all, in many ways for 100 plus years. The levees and different things that he was talking about. There's a couple things. Number one, I think the next generations of educators are gonna be like, this is dumb. Like our next generation are not, they're go-getters. Like the Gen Z, the alphas, yeah, they're not because they're gonna live this experience in an AI world and they're gonna be like, what the heck are we doing? And so I think it's going to minimize more and more people are going to be leaving the education system, unfortunately, because of the way that the paying things are structured. Now, what I've done personally is honestly, it was not only superintendent, but seeking out innovative models is where my next move was. And
Mm,
and I think that's going to scale. I think educators who are younger and more innovative, there's going to be a higher and higher percentage of them, are going to look for schools that are led by people like Chris. Like they're going to look for it because now the information is out there even more. And I can tell you, again, differences in school districts right now. There are school districts with Jason Van Nuss's sacred cow, and they are holding on to them with a death grip. They will not let them go. And they are watching. I know this because we have school districts reaching out to us saying, please help us. How do we get out of this? Not out of that district, but out of this like circular academic, chasing the tail kind of thing. Um, and they used to be unbelievably high performing districts in academics, and they still are, but they are losing out on this method, this CTE, this work, this experiential learning, these aptitudes and clarity of what's happening at the next level. And I think you're going to see that is a huge shift. I think that's very interesting. And I think, look, like we talked about this a lot on our episode about what makes a school good. And I love that episode because, what schools were measured by students' confidence and their adaptability, how they can network, and their professional competence. What would the rankings look like then? Right. And I think, again, Chris said we're accountable to the perception of achievement. And that's a damning statement right there. Because even in the what makes school, I think Christy was talking about it, Jason was talking about it. We make a data look good, but underneath it, it's not really there. So I think, we're rounding out, and this is kind of a challenge to our listeners, trying to think, okay, what should a high school diploma actually mean? Like what should it signal? What should every student have? Um, what would we redesign? What would you redesign? And I think, right now, in the position that I'm in, it's internships, it's starting earlier, it's the aptitudes and the interest and individualized education, it's portfolio development. It's funny because I just had a conversation with a sophomore today, and this kid is hungry. He wants to get into marketing and he wants to do all these things. And I'm coaching him. But why? Why is that not being fed right now in the education system individually to this human being, right? He wants more in this area. And trust me, Alli, I've never seen a kid like this driven as a sophomore. And it's like I want to try this stuff. I want to build a portfolio. How do I do it? How do I do these things? And all I'm going to do is start to teach him how to utilize an assistant, and that assistant's going to be AI. And then I'm going to work with them on a couple of different things that I know that maybe AI wouldn't pull. But outside of that, I'm like, giddy up. And here we are back on our horse.
Yeehaw!
Yeehaw. Yeehaw. So close this out. What do you think? What are your final thoughts on Chris and this episode?
Uh, this was a thinker. I really, there are just some episodes that it's like the right time, right place. Some you can hear something and it really just like washes across. It doesn't stick. It's like holding water in your hand. And then there's some conversations that they just pierce you in a different way.
Mhm.
And this was one of those. I'm really excited for our listeners to, and everybody who listens to podcasts, like we don't take it for granted. We appreciate you. We love, I do want to do a shout out for all of the amazing people who've been reaching out lately, sending these amazing messages, comments on YouTube or Spotify or wherever you listen. Like people who email us, like we take it to heart. we
Mhm.
we want to know that what we're putting out is like really good. Like you would want to come back every week and listen to it, watch it. And so thank you for those who reach out. If you have feedback for us, like let us know, right? Like you go to the rodeo, it's a good show, they want you to come back. They want to make it good. We do too. So we try to put all these awesome thought-provoking conversations that are really getting at what is disrupting education in 2026 and beyond. And so we've got a lot more coming. This summer is heating up, and we are just really excited for what's down the road. And it's already been an awesome almost half of 2026. Can't believe that by the time this comes out, we are effectively entering the second half of the year. So yeah, that's wild already.
Yeah, feeling old. Feeling old. Obviously, if you haven't listened to Chris Nesmith episode last week, go back and listen to it. I've got to listen to it again because there's so many pieces into it. What I really love about it is it's not, the future of education is not about choosing either college or career or I think it's really about building students who can move in between those worlds without closing doors. And I will tell you, some students are figuring it out. And if you have some students who are figuring it out, connect us with them, or we would love to meet some of them. We always have maybe a series around some of the younger folks. So we're putting some different things together there. But man, really great conversation today. Thank you, Alli. Thank you, listeners. And well, yeehaw, let's go. We'll see you next week on the Disrupt Education podcast. Y'all, come back now. Thanks for tuning in to the Disrupt Education podcast. If this episode sparked an idea, challenged your thinking, or helped you see education differently, well, that's exactly why we're here. We're highlighting real stories and bold ideas shaping the future of learning. A quick thank you to our sponsor, UScience BrightPath, the next generation platform helping students make personalized decisions as they move from education to career. If you're serious about connecting students to real opportunity, head to uscience.com/disrupteducation-podcast. Request a demo and let them know you heard about UScience right here on the Disrupt Education podcast. For more episodes and clips and ways to connect, you can always visit disrupteducationpodcast.com. I'm Peter Hostrasser. Keep disrupting. We'll see you next time on the podcast.